here's the problem for this hangar.
The bill are the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Business Secretary and former Chancellor Ken Clarke, and the Liberal Democrats Treasury spokesman Vince Cable, and also here Robert Choate, Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who will be providing some budget analysis. Yvette Cooper, this is a moment of truth, isn't it? It's a moment when viewers have to be told the truth. They're going to be worse off.
Well, we have set out forecasts for the economy, but also for the public finances as well. This is the first time since the Second World War that the entire world economy has shrunk. So, of course, that is having an impact. But actually, we think it's right.
But I'm thinking of the viewer at home.
Well,
what are you going to say to them about
the
how
most
it's going to be
important
for
thing
them?
for the viewer at home is that we do everything we can right now to support jobs, to help people stay in their homes, to prevent repossessions. And this budget actually is putting billions of pounds into backing jobs. Overall, all of these measures should protect about 500,000 jobs, but also provide several other 100,000 jobs, particularly for the young unemployed, because we can't ever go back to the 80s. So I think it's about getting through these difficult times and then investing for recovery and for the future.
Even if you win the next election, Ken Clarke, everybody's going to be worse off.
You're going to have some tough and difficult decisions, yes. What we've had is a gigantic problem described and no solution. Indeed, the government's overwhelmed by events and they're just drifting on, putting in bogus figures for future growth, a huge boom that's going to start in 2011 to stop giving any answers.
What Tory solution have they
We're going to
admitted?
look at public spending, obviously, first of all. We'd start public spending savings now. We denounced being brutal when we talked about efficiency savings. The government's now found another £9 billion worth of efficiency savings, but won't start them until the election's over. But that's only the start. You do have to have a culture change. You do have to look at the public spending totals. We prefer to actually start getting control of spending again. We can't guarantee they won't have tax increases. The reason for all this is not so to be severe.
One thing you'll cut that wasn't mentioned today.
One thing we'll cut, well, if they would give their 2010 budget, if they're going to give one, I would give ours, perhaps. But we've got...
Your plan is for cuts now, isn't it? Your plan is to cut budget
right
now
savings,
in the middle of a recession. I mean,
your plan is as well. But
no, we've
we're
set
not
out plans.
Well,
you have to change people's contracts, you have to, change back office services, you have to sell off additional property, all of those sorts of things, which take time.
I've heard you earlier today describing things we're doing which we're not doing.
But David Cameron said it's to make cuts this year.
No, he didn't say that.
But I'm trying to put some blue water between.
Bring forward the efficiency savings. This year, in the depths of a recession, of course, I don't have to have it explained to me that you don't start fiscally tightening in the middle of a recession. We would use the money to relieve savers of tax to use for the programme we announced for students and skills training.
But actually, your policy is...
Right, let me bring the third party in
no
here.
fiscal tightening this year. But your programme is a complete myth based on bogus figures.
We'll come back to this.
And even the cuts in spending, which are quite sharp, that you've announced, you deliberately, cynically put them the other side of an election.
David Cameron specifically said that all departments would be restricted to 1% growth this year. That's a substantial cut in the budgets that departments are already using.
On that, you have
right now, in
what
the
you
middle
said.
of a recession, cutting
Cable.
apprenticeships. This seems madness to me.
What, from your perspective, was left out of this budget?
Well, as following on from that discussion, it's any indication at all about how public expenditure growth is going to be managed in the long term.
So how would the Liberal Democrats manage it?
I think by being more specific than Ken has been, but heading in the same direction. I mean, we've already identified a whole series of very specific things that we would cut, and they're not easy things. Baby bonds, slash the Eurofighter contract, get rid of the ID card scheme, scrap a large part of the NHS IT scheme. Those are very specific and they're short term, but looking beyond that, you have to look at some of the really big ticket items which are very difficult to manage. Public sector pensions are potentially out of control. Actual outlays have doubled in the last 3 or 4 years. It's not sustainable. We're going to have to look at it very difficult. Looking at the defence budget and the worldwide commitments, looking at the tax credit scheme, which is a very progressive idea, but it goes right up the income scale and is unaffordable. Looking at the commitment to higher education, half of all the young people go to university. It's a great ideal, but we cannot afford it in these constrained circumstances.
Okay, Robert Choate, virtually everybody looking in is probably in debt, if you take in their house and everything else, to the tune of 4 times their income. Perfectly standard. Why should we worry that the UK is in debt, say, to 78% of its income? And furthermore, isn't it anyway how the Germans live?
Well, as the indebtedness of the economy goes up, then you have to devote more money that you might either wish to give away in tax cuts or to spend on something you prefer to spend it on in debt interest in the future. I think the key point to bear in mind is that we've got debt now rising from 40 probably to about 80%, and it's going to require an enormous squeeze both on public spending and on tax increases to stop it ballooning really to very unsustainable levels and an unending increase in debt interest payments. Even with this big squeeze running over 2 parliaments, it's going to take a long time to get debt back down to anything like its pre-crisis levels.
Yvette Cooper, you talk about the economy shrinking by 3.5%, and then miraculously it bounces back by almost the same amount. Where do you get this great bounce from?
Well, if you look historically, then often when you get a particular hit to the economy and the economy contracts, often it can bounce back quite fast.
But you're saying it will.
We think that it will in these circumstances because of the action that we're taking. So investing in jobs, the cuts in interest rates, which are worth hundreds of pounds to people on tracker mortgages, the action the Bank of England is taking to put money directly into the economy, those sorts of things. The cut in VAT, which the Tesco's boss and independent economic analysts have been saying is working to put more money and more support into the economy.
But this is a kind of dot-com boom type growth. We've never seen anything outside the dot-com boom of this level.
Well, actually, historically, we have seen periods when we have seen, particularly after a recession, when things come back and the economy starts to grow again, businesses start to invest again. But it's important to get to that point.
OK, well, you've lived through a few recessions. I mean, have you seen a bounce like this?
I'm afraid I don't think Yvette believes a word of this. They decided they couldn't put any difficult options in because the Prime Minister wouldn't allow them. They therefore put in for the year after next a growth figure which was necessary in order to pretend there wasn't a problem.
But if she's wrong then, and you win the next election, then it's going to be even worse than they say it is.
I would love to believe it's right. I mean, the last budget in November, they said the recession was going to end by next month, and then we were going to have growth for the second half of this year. They did the same thing last November. It's just bogus. One of the things you require, and one of the things at least Vince and I agree on, is you have to have some candour in accepting not only the problem you've described, but you've got to look for some realistic solutions. And I would like to take more care in exactly if it's all drawing up a budget for 2010 and exactly how you change the culture and get the discipline on public spending, but that's where you've got to go.
Well,
Labour's incapable of doing that.
Vince Cooper, do you believe 3.5% growth?
Absolutely not. And I think there's a basic lack of logic in the position. On the one hand, the argument is being advanced the economy is going to recover rather as it did after the Tory recession in the early 90s. But on the other hand, as the government itself argued, this is a fundamentally different kind of recession with very deep-rooted problems. The banking system is bombed out, just isn't functioning. The banking system is going to take a long, long time to operate properly and provide credit on a normal basis. The housing bubble has burst spectacularly. It hasn't finished that process. And, you cannot suddenly achieve rapid growth against that kind of background.
All right, and objectively, 3.5% possible growth?
Well, it's possible if you end up in a deep hole and you can grow relatively rapidly for a while you're coming out of it. I think the key point, though, to bear in mind from this budget is how much of the additional borrowing that we have in prospect is just going to be impervious to economic recovery. Of the £175 billion of borrowing, 140 billion of it is structural in the Treasury's language, and that essentially means that once the economy is back to its Goldilocks state, that borrowing is still there, and that's why you're having to have this very long period of austerity, 2 parliaments worth, to get you back to anything like normality.
Well, this is interactive. Krishnan has been twittering with Twitterers.
Indeed, people have actually been reacting to the argument that's been going on over there. One person tweets, why is Mrs. Yvette Cooper, that is, denying the real cuts in Labour spending plans? Another says 3.5% growth by 2011 is ridiculous, an irresponsible forecast putting back on a boom-bust cycle in quick time. And someone called The Burning Spear says, for Yvette Cooper, why will there be this boomerang boom in 2011? There's a lot on 50% tax too. Let me just put this to you. 50% tax doesn't make you want to go out and earn more money and improve yourself, does it, Yvette Cooper?
Rich people Twitter.
Well, I think the 50 pence tax is only for those who are on the highest of incomes. It's only for the very top 1%. And I think, we have to be honest that we are going to have to raise additional taxes once the economy is growing again to make sure the public finances are sustainable. And I do think the fairest way is to have it for those who have had the biggest increases in their incomes. Of course, we want to keep supporting aspirations and supporting entrepreneurship, but I do think that this is fair. you know, these pressed economic times to say that that's where the extra resources should come from so that we can keep protecting our public services and keep investing in health and education.
Will you